I will show you how you can create an 808 bass sound using any synthesizer. Now, the original 808 had a sort of boomy bass sound, so that's what we're going to concentrate on. However, over the years, producers have sampled it and resampled it and processed it and turned it into something which is probably not exactly like the original, but we still may think of these as an 808. So although we are going to be concentrating on the sine wave boomy sound, you can of course use any waveform, and if you have a wavetable synthesizer, the world is your oyster, although it may not end up sounding like a boomy 808 bass. It's always good to experiment, so after we create our basic 808 sound, I'll describe various ways in which you can change and enhance it. Let's get started. So that you can follow what I am doing on any synthesizer, I am using the Moog Grandmother. It is a pretty simple subtractive synth. Having said that, it is more powerful than you may think just looking at the controls. However, it has all the modules we need, and it is really very simple. So everything that you have on here, you will have on virtually any other synthesizer, certainly any other subtractive synthesizer, any other modular, semi-modular synthesizer, polyphonic synthesizer, monophonic synthesizer, as this is, and absolutely on any VST virtual instrument. And we're in the main going to use just three sections of this: the oscillator section, the filter section, and the ADSR section. Now, if you don't have a Moog Grandmother, I shall explain what everything does as we go along. So the first thing we want to do is to select a sound which we get from the oscillators. Now, at the moment, I am only using oscillator 2. This is the mixer section. At the moment, only oscillator 2 has been turned up. So, like that. So when you think of an 808, you probably think of a subby bass type sound, which would normally be produced by a sine wave. Now, virtually every synthesizer has got a sine wave. The Moog Grandmother, however, does not, but it does have a triangle wave. Now, a triangle wave is very similar to a sine wave, except it has a few more harmonics. So if you want a really subby bass sound, and let's just say you have a Grandmother or you have a synthesizer which does not have a sine wave, then you can use a triangle wave, but in that case you probably will want to shave off some of the higher harmonics, and we do that in the filter section. So if I play a note and then adjust the filter, you can hear that the higher harmonics are being decreased. And if we turn it all the way down, we remove even the fundamentals, so there's no sound at all. And you can hear the harmonics are starting to creep in there. So if you want a really subby sound, then you can cut out just about all the harmonics. Something like that. And if you want something a little bit brighter, we'll get into this in just a minute, then you can turn it up a little bit. So this basically gives us our bass tone. Now, we can set the octave. At the moment, this is set to 16 feet, which is 1 octave down. Now, in reality, you may want to play this 1 octave even lower than that. However, I am sticking with this pitch and this setting so you can hear it. If you are listening on a phone or a tablet, you may not be able to hear really low notes. And I really don't know what the YouTube algorithm is going to do with sort of sub bass notes down here. So just to let you know, this is, I think it's a reasonable bass pitch, but in practice you will probably start the bass notes about an octave low. But again, that's up to you. So now that we have our sound, our pitch, we have to shape the volume of the sound. So we want a fast attack, so the bass cuts in straight away as soon as we press a key. Fast attack, fast decay, 0 sustain, and we play a key. I don't know if you can hear that. It is just producing a click. This is because the attack is setting the volume as high as possible, and then the decay is bringing it down to as low as possible. So this is just, it's really a very, very short spike which is producing this click. So we don't hear the sound. So what we need to do is just increase the decay until we get this nice bass sound. Again, this is something we can play with and adjust, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But essentially, that is your Common or Garden 808 sound. Now, there are several things you can do with this, many modifications you can make. First of all, let's play with the filter, because this is a source of great fun and a great power as well. So as I said initially when we were setting up the patch, if we increase the cutoff, we get more harmonics. So you can adjust that. Now, one thing which many producers do to an 808 sound is they process it in various ways. Typically, they will add something like overdrive or distortion or saturation, something like that, to dirty up the sound a little bit. Now, we've got none of that on the Grandmother. If your synth has something like that, then run it through the processor and see what it sounds like. If you're recording to a DAW, then of course you can always use a plug-in to add some saturation or overdrive. They typically distort some of the harmonics, so you get a slightly richer sound. So we can do that by adding in more harmonics here. And there's another way we can do that as well, which we'll come to on in a second. Now, one other thing you can do is to increase the resonance. Now, the resonance boosts the frequencies at the cutoff point. So if you imagine this is your frequency spectrum, which it sort of is, and we have reduced the cutoff down to about here, so we're only getting a small fraction of the entire frequency range, then the resonance will boost the frequencies at the cutoff point. Yes, well, you can hear it's adding a sort of boing to it. Now, the thing is, if we reduce, turn that down, if we reduce the cutoff so far, then the resonance has virtually no effect, because there's hardly any frequency there to boost. So the cutoff must be allowing a certain amount of higher frequencies through. So that produces a bit more of a twangy, boingy noise. And again, this is just obviously how the Grandmother handles these settings, but these are things you can try on your own instrument and see what results you get. But that adds a few more harmonics to the sound as well. So let's put that back. Just turn the cutoff up a little bit. So one thing you might notice on some synths, particularly digital synthesizers and particularly software synthesizers, which have super fast digital envelopes. This is an analog synthesizer, so I'm guessing that the envelope settings are not quite as fast as a digital system. But on some systems, if you have a really fast attack, you sometimes get a little bit of a click. And it's sort of coming through there a little bit. Not too much, and it sort of varies. This is a variable analog circuit after all. But if that happens, then all you need to do is just turn up the attack just a fraction until the click disappears. And that may not be necessary on an analog system. So one other thing we can do to vary the tone is to modulate the filter with the envelope. Now on the Grandmother, we can use this little control here. So if we turn this clockwise, this will let the filter cutoff be modulated by the envelope. If you have a software synth, you will probably have a massive modulation matrix, and you will be able to allocate the envelope to the filter. You probably have more than one envelope, you probably have more than one filter. You can probably create your own envelope specifically for the filter and use that, and that will give you more flexibility than using the volume envelope. So as we turn this up, the envelope is modulating the filter by an increasing amount. And you can hear as we turn it up, the sound is getting brighter. Again, this is because when the envelope triggers when we press a key, thank you, when the envelope triggers when we press a key, it sends a signal to the cutoff filter control, which opens the filter, and then because it's got a very short decay, it slowly closes the filter. So we get this opening and rapid closing of the filter to produce this sound. So we can use the envelope to modulate the filter to give us more variation in tone. I'll put that back to 0, so we're back with our subby bass. Now, one other thing we can do if you want an even bigger sound is to add a second oscillator, if you have one. We do have one here, so this is also set to a triangle waveform. It's running through the same filter, so it will be filtered down to a sub-bass level. So I'm going to turn the oscillator 2 down, off, virtually, and then bring up oscillator 1, and you can hear this is an octave lower, and that is really boomy. I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear that. I think you probably will. So what we can do, this is our oscillator 2. So if you want to add a sub-bass to the 808, you can use a second oscillator set to whatever you like really, but this sub-basses are normally a sine wave, so this is through the same filter. So if we bring in this lower oscillator, which is set to 32 feet, so that's an octave lower than the main oscillator. So you can hear already that is adding a sub oscillator to the main oscillator. So that's a way to broaden and deepen the sound. Right, so I said I would come back to the release phase of the envelope generator. Now, as it is said, if we play really short notes, the release doesn't have any effect because there is it's not a fast decay setting, but it's fairly fast. So if we hold down a key, you can hear the sound, the volume dies away quite slowly, or relatively slowly, depending on the decay setting. Now, with the release set to 0, an interesting thing happens. Let's try that again. So we get this slow decay. Now, if we release the key before the decay phase has ended, it jumps immediately to the release phase, and as the release is set to 0, it immediately cuts off like this. So with this setting, if you play staccato, you get a very sharp cutoff. If you play slightly more legato, it's a monophonic synth, so you have to be careful how you play it if you want all the notes to sound. But if you play slightly more legato, then the notes hang on for a bit longer. So this setting will depend on what you are playing. If you activate the arpeggiator, for example, and depending on how fast the arpeggiator is running, you might want to increase the release a little bit. That's a very staccato sound. So that might be a better bass sound for your tune. So if the decay and release are set to approximately the same value, then it doesn't matter if you play staccato or hold the notes down, the notes will sound for approximately the same amount of time. But that is something you can play with, especially if you are using an arpeggiator. So I think we've covered the 808 basics and everything you can do with an 808 sound, and if you have more features and more facilities, you can experiment with that, add more harmonics, add more distortion, saturation. You can play with separate envelopes for the filter and the volume envelope. But this is the basic sound, and you should be able to create this on absolutely any synthesizer. So I hope you found that interesting and useful, and if you haven't created your own 808 bass sound yet, then perhaps you will give it a try. Let me know what synth or synths you've been using, and let me know what you think of the results in the comments. I'd be really interested to know what you think. If you like tutorials like this, you might want to consider subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell. Thank you. So YouTube will tell you whenever I post a new video. If you like synthesizers and tutorials, you might like to check out some of these. And if you like the Moog Grandmother, you might like to check out some of these too. See you again soon.